Welcome to GK Quiz Prime Time. Which Constitutional Amendment Act of India introduced the Goods and Services Tax? Right answer is option B, 101st Amendment Act 2016. The word secular, socialist, and integrity were added to the preamble by which constitutional amendment? Right answer is option C, 42nd Amendment Act 1976. Which constitutional amendment act reduced the voting age in India from 21 years to 18 years? Right answer is option D, 61st Amendment Act 1989. The 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act 1976 is popularly known by which name? Correct answer is option B, the Mini Constitution. Which constitutional amendment granted Sikkim the status of an associate state of India? Right answer is option B, 35th Amendment Act 1974. The Bodoland Territorial District was included in the Assam Legislative Assembly through which amendment? Right answer is option B, 90th Amendment Act 2003. Under which article of the Indian Constitution can amendments be made to the Constitution? Correct answer is option B, Article 368. Which part of the Indian Constitution gives Parliament the power to amend the Constitution? Right answer is option C, Part 20. Which amendment increased the retirement age of High Court judges from 60 to 62 years? Correct answer is option C, 15th Amendment Act 1963. By which constitutional amendment was the right to property removed from the list of fundamental rights and made a legal right under Article 300A? Right answer is option C, 44th Amendment Act 1978. By which constitutional amendment was the right to property removed from the list of fundamental rights? Right answer is option B, 44th Amendment Act 1978. Which constitutional amendment added the ninth schedule to the Constitution of India? Right answer is option A, First Amendment Act 1951. In which constitutional amendment act was the term of the Lok Sabha reduced from 6 years back to 5 years? Right answer is option B, 44th Amendment Act 1978. By which constitutional amendment was Meghalaya carved out of Assam to form a new state? Right answer is option B, 22nd Amendment Act 1969. Which constitutional amendment abolished reserved seats for the Anglo Indian community in parliament and state legislatures? Right answer is option C, 104th Amendment Act 2020. The 91st Constitutional Amendment Act 2003 was enacted to control which political issue? Right answer is option B, party defections and size of Council of Ministers. Which constitutional amendment act made it mandatory for the president to give assent to constitutional amendment bills? Right answer is option D, 24th Amendment Act 1971. By which constitutional amendment act was Mizoram granted full statehood within the Indian Union? Correct answer is option C, 53rd Amendment Act 1986. The 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act 1976 extended the term of Lok Sabha and state assemblies from 5 to how many years? Right answer is option A, 6 years. Under which Constitutional Amendment Act was Arunachal Pradesh granted full statehood? Correct answer is option C, 55th Amendment Act 1986. Which constitutional amendment added Dogri, Maithili, Santali, and Bodo languages to the 8th schedule? Correct answer is option C, 92nd Amendment Act 2003. Which amendment made a provision for 27% reservation for OBCs in educational institutions? Correct answer is option B, 93rd Amendment Act 2005. By which amendment was the official Hindi version of the Constitution provided to the people of India? Correct answer is option B, 58th Amendment Act 1987. Which constitutional amendment added Sindhi language to the 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution? Correct answer is option C, 21st Amendment Act 1967. The constitutional status to the OBC Commission was granted under which amendment? Right answer is option C, 102nd Amendment Act 2018. By which constitutional amendment was Sikkim made the 22nd state of the Indian Union? Correct answer is option B, 36th Amendment Act 1975. Which amendment extended the reservation of SCs and STs in Parliament and assemblies for another 10 years? Right answer is option B, 104th Amendment Act 2020. Under which amendment was Pondicherry added as a union territory in the first schedule? Right answer is option A, 14th Amendment Act 1962. Which constitutional amendment gave constitutional status to the Panchayati Raj system in India? Right answer is option B, 73rd Amendment Act 1992. Which constitutional amendment provided for 33% reservation for women in local self government bodies? Correct answer is option B, 73rd Amendment Act 1992. Which amendment eliminated the need for a joint sitting of Parliament for electing the Vice President of India? Correct answer is option B, 11th Amendment Act 1961. The land boundary agreement between India and Bangladesh was implemented through which amendment? Right answer is option B, 100th Amendment Act 2015. By which constitutional amendment was Dadra and Nagar Haveli incorporated into the Indian Union as a union territory? Correct answer is option B, 10th Amendment Act 1961. Which constitutional amendment merged Goa, Daman, and Diu with the Indian Union? Right answer is option C, 12th Amendment Act 1962. Which amendment divided India into 14 states and 6 union territories, removing the earlier fourfold classification of states? Right answer is option A, 7th Amendment Act 1956. Which of the following constitutional amendment acts is related to the transfer of the Berubari Union Number 12 from India to Pakistan? Right answer is option B, 9th Amendment Act 1960. Which constitutional amendment allowed the same person to be appointed as the governor of one or more states or union territories? Right answer is option B, 7th Amendment Act 1956. In which constitutional amendment was the maximum strength of the Lok Sabha fixed at 545 members? Right answer is option C, 31st Amendment Act 1973. Which amendment provided that laws made to implement directive principles under Articles 39B and C cannot be challenged? Right answer is option B, 25th Amendment Act 1971. By which constitutional amendment was the representation of union territories in the Lok Sabha reduced from 25 to 20 members? Correct answer is option C, 31st Amendment Act 1973. The economically weaker section reservation was introduced through which constitutional amendment? Right answer is option A, 103rd Amendment Act 2019. The 124th Amendment Bill, which later became the 103rd Amendment Act, provided for what measure? Right answer is option B, 10% reservation for economically weaker sections. Which constitutional amendment act reduced the number of fundamental rights from 7 to 6? Correct answer is option C, 44th Amendment Act 1978. In which constitutional amendment was Delhi officially renamed as the National Capital Territory of Delhi? Right answer is option B, 69th Amendment Act 1991. Under which amendment could a national emergency be imposed in the entire or part of India? Right answer is option B, 44th Amendment Act 1978. By which amendment were 10 fundamental duties added to the Indian Constitution? Correct answer is option C, 42nd Amendment Act 1976. The first amendment to the Constitution of India was made in which year? Right answer is option B, 1951. By which constitutional amendment was it provided that the total number of members in a state legislative council shall not exceed one third of the total members of the Legislative Assembly? Right answer is option B, 7th Amendment Act 1956. Under which amendment were four additional languages added to the 8th schedule, increasing the total to 22? Right answer is option D, 92nd Amendment Act 2003. By which constitutional amendment act was the 11th fundamental duty added to the Indian Constitution? Right answer is option C, 86th Amendment Act 2002. The ninth schedule to the Constitution of India was added by which constitutional amendment act? Correct answer is option A, First Amendment Act 1951. Which constitutional amendment act constituted the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes as a separate constitutional body? Right answer is option C, 89th Amendment Act 2003. The abolition of the zamindari system was facilitated by which constitutional amendment of the Indian Constitution? Right answer is option A, First Amendment Act 1951. Which constitutional amendment act increased the maximum limit of profession tax from rupees 250 per annum to rupees 2500 per annum? Correct answer is option C, 60th Amendment Act 1988. By which Constitutional Amendment Act was Part 9B titled Cooperative Societies inserted into the Indian Constitution? Right answer is option C, 97th Amendment Act 2011. Which Constitutional Amendment Act froze the number of seats in the Lok Sabha and state legislative assemblies till the year 2026? Right answer is option D, 84th Amendment Act 2001. By which Constitutional Amendment Act were Articles 102 and 191 amended and anti-defection provisions added as the 10th schedule to the Constitution? Right answer is option C, 52nd Amendment Act 1985. Which Constitutional Amendment Act inserted Article 371A into the Indian Constitution, providing special provisions for the administration of the state of Nagaland? Correct answer is option B, 13th Amendment Act 1962. Under which Constitutional Amendment Act did education for children between the ages of 6 and 14 years become a fundamental right? Correct answer is option B, 86th Amendment Act 2002. Which special feature of the Indian Constitution related to constitutional amendments has been borrowed from the Constitution of South Africa? Right answer is option C, Special Procedure for Constitutional Amendments. In which Constitutional Amendment Act were states allowed to relax minimum qualifying marks for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in promotion to government jobs? Right answer is option D, 82nd Amendment Act 2000. By which Constitutional Amendment Act were Konkani, Manipuri, and Nepali languages included in the 8th schedule of the Constitution? Right answer is option C, 71st Amendment Act 1992. By which Constitutional Amendment Act was it provided that a national emergency can be proclaimed only on the ground of armed rebellion and not internal disturbance? Correct answer is option C, 44th Amendment Act 1978. Which Constitutional Amendment Act reorganized the Northeastern region by creating 5 states and 2 union territories? Right answer is option B, 27th Amendment Act 1971. Which Constitutional Amendment Act made the proclamation of emergency issued by the President non justiciable, meaning it could not be challenged in any court? Right answer is option B, 38th Amendment Act 1975. By which Constitutional Amendment Act were state land reform laws kept outside the jurisdiction of courts by placing them in the ninth schedule? Correct answer is option A, First Amendment Act 1951. By which Constitutional Amendment Act were provisions relating to municipalities added to the Constitution of India? Right answer is option A, 74th Amendment Act 1992. Which Constitutional Amendment Act included the Tamil Nadu Reservation Act 1994 in the ninth schedule to protect it from judicial review? Right answer is option B, 76th Amendment Act 1994. By which Constitutional Amendment Act was the National Judicial Appointments Commission formed, though it was later struck down by the Supreme Court? Correct answer is option C, 99th Amendment Act 2014. Under which Constitutional Amendment Act has one third of the total seats in the Lok Sabha, state legislative assemblies, and the Legislative Assembly of Delhi been reserved for women for 15 years? Right answer is option C, 106th Amendment Act 2023. Which Constitutional Amendment Act expressly provides that the President of India is bound to act according to the advice of the Council of Ministers? Right answer is option A, 42nd Amendment Act 1976. By which Constitutional Amendment Act was reservation in promotion for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes extended beyond November 1997? Right answer is option B, 77th Amendment Act 1995. By which Constitutional Amendment Act was the President's power to withhold assent to a constitutional amendment bill taken away by substituting the words shall give his assent? Correct answer is option B, 24th Amendment Act 1971. The 40th Constitutional Amendment Act 1976 was enacted mainly to amend which article of the Constitution of India? Right answer is option A, Article 297. By which Constitutional Amendment Act was Goa granted full statehood and Daman and Diu made a separate union territory? Correct answer is option C, 56th Amendment Act 1987. Which Constitutional Amendment Act prohibited the requirement of reservation for scheduled castes in panchayats in the state of Arunachal Pradesh? Right answer is option B, 83rd Amendment Act 2000. In which Constitutional Amendment Act were backlog vacancies of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes excluded from the 50th reservation limit? Right answer is option B, 81st Amendment Act 2000. Before the enactment of the 104th Constitutional Amendment Act, under which article could the President nominate members of the Anglo Indian community to the Lok Sabha? Right answer is option B, Article 331. Under the 31st Constitutional Amendment Act 1973, the maximum number of seats in the Lok Sabha was increased to which figure? Right answer is option D, 545. By which Constitutional Amendment Act were Articles 371D and 371E inserted into the Constitution relating to special provisions for the state of Andhra Pradesh? Right answer is option C, 32nd Amendment Act 1973. By which Constitutional Amendment Act was education transferred from the state list to the concurrent list of the Indian Constitution? Right answer is option C, 42nd Amendment Act 1976. What is the minimum age required to contest elections to Panchayati Raj institutions under the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act? Right answer is option B, 21 years. Which Constitutional Amendment Act removed disputes relating to the elections of the President, Vice President, Prime Minister, and Speaker of the Lok Sabha from the jurisdiction of the courts? Right answer is option C, 39th Amendment Act 1975. Which Constitutional Amendment Act imposed a ban on defection by elected members of political parties in legislative bodies? Right answer is option B, 52nd Amendment Act 1985. Which Constitutional Amendment Act restricts the total number of union ministers to 15% of the total strength of the Lok Sabha? Correct answer is option A, 91st Amendment Act 2003. Which Constitutional Amendment Act made it mandatory to appoint a Minister for Tribal Affairs in the states of Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand? Right answer is option C, 94th Amendment Act 2006. In which Constitutional Amendment Act was the Tamil Nadu law providing 69% reservation in government jobs added to the ninth schedule of the Constitution? Right answer is option C, 76th Amendment Act 1994. Which constitutional amendment act empowered Parliament to determine the limits of India's territorial waters, continental shelf, exclusive economic zone, and other maritime zones? Right answer is option D, 40th Amendment Act 1976. By which constitutional amendment act were states entitled to receive 26% share of the net proceeds of central taxes? Right answer is option C, 80th Amendment Act 2000. Under which constitutional amendment act did Arunachal Pradesh get its own legislative assembly and council of ministers while remaining a union territory? Right answer is option C, 37th Amendment Act 1975. By which constitutional amendment act was the separation of any state from the Indian Union prohibited? Correct answer is option B, 16th Amendment Act 1963. In which constitutional amendment act was it provided that constitutional amendments made by Parliament could not be challenged in courts? Right answer is option C, 42nd Amendment Act 1976. By which constitutional amendment act were the members of the legislative assemblies of Delhi and Puducherry included in the Electoral College for the election of the president? Right answer is option C, 70th Amendment Act 1992. Which constitutional amendment act added Article 51A to the Indian Constitution, establishing the duty of parents and guardians relating to the right to education? Right answer is option B, 86th Amendment Act 2002. By which constitutional amendment act were 27 land reform laws passed by 7 states included in the ninth schedule? Correct answer is option C, 78th Amendment Act 1995. By which constitutional amendment act was a new Article 334A added to the Indian Constitution? Right answer is option D, 106th Amendment Act 2023. Which constitutional amendment act provides for the collection of service tax by the central government and its distribution between the center and the states? Right answer is option B, 88th Amendment Act 2003. From where can the initiative to amend the Constitution of India be introduced? Right answer is option D, any House of Parliament. Which constitutional amendment act reorganized the governance of Delhi by providing a 70-member legislative assembly and a 7-member council of ministers? Right answer is option B, 69th Amendment Act 1991. In which constitutional amendment act were subjects such as education, forests, weights and measures, and protection of wild animals and birds shifted from the state list to the concurrent list? Right answer is option A, 42nd Amendment Act 1976. Stay updated, stay ahead. Subscribe for more current affairs and competitive exam prep.